morning, everybody. Welcome to Beacon's virtual service this day of fall. I am so happy to be with all of you. My name is Tuli Patel, and I have the honor of being your executive director as well as the lead for the Lifespan Ministry team. And I'm joined this morning by...
My name is Misa Iwama, and I'm the Director of Music Ministry.
And I am Meg Kimberland. I've been a member of Beacon since 2013.
Thank you, Meg and Misa, for being with us today. A special welcome to our newcomers. You want to make sure to attend Starting Point, which is next Sunday at 12:15. The instructions on how to sign up will appear very soon, if they haven't already, in your chat box. And I hope you all have enjoyed the photographs from our water communion services, which took place in 5 different locations, the most geographically widespread water communion ever. A few announcements. Today at 1 o'clock, small groups for our pre-K through 5th graders will begin. And also at that same time will be our conversation on the covenant. If you're an adult guide for our small groups and you want to be part of the covenant conversations, don't worry, we'll have lots of other opportunities as well. And at 4 o'clock today, I'm headed into Beacon to welcome our pre-K through 2nd graders into a children's chapel in person, but it does need pre-registration. You need to sign up by going to our little Facebook group and finding the link there. And now I want to talk a little bit to Meg. Meg, thank you so much again for being with us this morning. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're engaged with? Because I can tell you 17 years ago when I came to Beacon, I had no clue what was going on. Meg.
Well, we are in the middle of the services auction preparations.
And what is the services auction?
Well, it is a fundraiser, but it's also a really great way to get people together. Standard auction stuff, Beacon folks donate great items, and then they are put up for bid, sometimes at a fixed price and sometimes by competitive bid.
Thank you, Meg. And usually we gather in the sanctuary for the auction, but we can't this year. So how are we doing it?
The whole thing will be online. So donating as well as bidding will be online at the auction website, which is togetherauction.com/summitbeacon. And right now we're in the donation phase. This will run until 8 a.m. November 8th. And the bidding phase will run from November 14th till November 22nd. Also 8 a.m. because all the people who are involved in the auction are morning people.
Ah, very, very good. But people who are not morning people can bid later on, right?
Oh, all day long, 24/7. We will launch the bidding with a launch party, and that will involve Dr. Tuli Patel as our MC. Yeah, you. So November 14th, the evening of November 14th, launch party.
I sometimes struggle with what I've said yes to, but thank you, Meg. And Meg, what can people donate? Tell us, like what can people, because I might be sitting here thinking, I don't know what to do. It's the pandemic. What can people donate?
There is a list on the auction website homepage. And you can also see what other people are donating on that website. You just go to the catalog. And then when you've got an idea and you want to talk about it, you could email servicesauction@summitbeacon.org if you want to kick around your ideas. Otherwise, just go ahead and enter it into the website. And that's it. It's really easy.
So what are some examples of things that are appropriate for these distancing times?
Well, there have been a number of congregations that have held successful services auctions in pandemic times. So that's what that list on the homepage of the website shows you, some ideas from these other congregations. But my favorite ideas include things like trivia nights and game nights. And what I'm hoping is that we have multiple of each of these. And if those ideas excite you, but you don't know how to proceed, we have people who can guide you through either hosting an evening like that or being a co-host. Another idea that I really love is a cooking lesson or baking lesson. You could send your ingredient list to your guests ahead of time, or if you have certain esoteric ingredients, maybe you'll distribute an ingredients package and then have a video conference to walk people through your recipe. But what I'm really hoping for, and it won't be me because kids scare me, but if somebody has enough guts to host a kids cooking session, I think it would be awesome.
That sounds fantastic, Meg. So everybody remember, it's our largest fundraiser. And Meg, remind me again, what is the website?
togetherauction.com/summitbeacon.
Thank you. And it'll be in your chat box for those of you who are following along. Thank you so much, Meg. And Misa, what might be coming up to get our creative juices flowing as we consider our services auction offerings?
Well, two things actually. We will be doing a creative cabaret that you'll hear much more about in the coming weeks as a services auction, working with our group of producers led by Judy Brewer. So you will hear more about that later. But what I'd like to talk about is something that's going to happen this coming Wednesday at noon. It's our Barn Beacon Arts Room at noon. And we are going to be actually having a cooking lesson, or a baking lesson, I should say. Our guest is Danny DiGiacomo, who's a professional chef and Beacon congregant. And he's going to talk about food, family, love, how we have an emotional connection through food. And he is going to be showing us how to bake his family's cake. Now, we have the recipe on the website on the Barn page. I myself am going to be baking that cake. I think I'm going to be doing it ahead of time, so because he's faster than me. But get ready for Wednesday because we're going to sing and we're going to talk about food and family, and we're going to bake. It's going to be really fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Misa. It sounds very exciting. This Wednesday, September 30th at 12 o'clock. This past 2 weeks have been difficult for many of us. A week before last, we lost Justice Ginsburg, and this past week, we've lost one of the major leaders in the UU movement, Elandria Williams. And so this is what we do when we come together. We come together to reaffirm our bonds to one another, to buoy our spirits, and to remember these people who have passed and the values that they stood for. And to help us do this and to lead us into worship, Misa is going to start us off with song.
Let's start by singing Hine Matov. It's in the charcoal gray hymnal. It's 392, but you can just sing it with the it sounds a la 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 la, and that's how I will start, so that you just get the tune into your body. The words are Hine Matov Umanayim, Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, and what that means is how good and pleasant it is that we can be together. And it goes like this. La 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 la. In the second section, la 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 la. La 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 la. I'd love it if you would just keep on singing, and I'm going to sing the words to it. It goes, Hine matov umanayim, shevet achim gam yad. Hine matov umanayim, shevet achim gam yad. Hine matov, shevet achim gam yad. Hine matov, shevet achim gam yad. So for me, part of what I love about having a Sunday morning get-together like this, a worship service, is being able to feel like I'm in the presence of other congregants, but also in the presence of our ancestors, of our spiritual ancestors, of our familiar ancestors, of our cultural ancestors. So the next thing we're going to sing this morning is also from the Charcoal Gray Hymnal. It's number 389. It's called Gathered Here in the Mystery of the Hour. So just as we said, Chine ma tov u'manayim, shevet ahim gam yachad, how good it is, how lovely to be together. Here we are going to be gathering in one strong body, in the struggle and the power of being together. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirits, draw near. One more time. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power. Spirit, draw near. Spirit, draw near. Spirit, draw near. And now we begin anew with the chalice lighting.
Since 1980, Unitarian Universalists have celebrated water communion. Begun at the Women in Religion Continental Convocation of Unitarian Universalists in East Lansing, Michigan, by Carolyn McDade and Lucille Shuck-Wally. This originally was a ritual used as a way for women who lived far apart to connect the work each was doing locally to the whole. So we bring the waters of community. This ritual teaches us again and again that we are inseparable from one another in this interconnected web of existence, and that we are ever greater together than one. We call out the salt waters, bitter and briny and beautiful, making bodies buoyant. Home to whale, sea anemone, slick green seaweed, and rough, brilliant coral. We call upon these waters that hold tears, heartache, lament, and injustice. Journeys by choice, by force, by compulsion, made across waters. These waters that touch stone, and so we call forth these virtual waters, gathered across the states and by intentions beyond our borders. We call forth as well waters from Westfield, Scotchwood, Sandwood, Scotch Plains.
We call out the waters of creation, pulsing and molecular, subatomic, reformed in our bodies which animated the ancestors. H2O of the ancients. Waters held in the bodies of prophets and sages. The words upon their tongue, engendered by those molecules. The rainbow illuminating the arc of the moral universe. Waters of creativity and imagination. We welcome now the waters from Short Hills and Millville.
We call out the fresh waters, raging and placid, blue and green and gray, flowing in our rivers and resting in our lakes. dewdrops in the morn on the leaves of dogwood, and nourishment for our crops, the quenching of our thirst to sustain all living things. We mingle into these waters, those from Madison, from Morris,
now the waters of history. These ancient aquifers running deep beneath soil and root. Waters sourcing springs deep in the desert, free of pollution and contaminants. In this vessel already are held the waters of 20 years of water ceremonies in this beacon. Sacred waters across the ages brought to the forehead of babies and the wombs of the elk. Waters dedicating space as sacred. We call on ancestors of strength and courage, including those who are notorious for their justice. May the waters that sustain them now sustain us. May the work they left be ours to do. We call now forth the waters from East Orange, West Orange, Maplewood, and South Orange.
In truth, our waters are one, connecting us to all life that has been and ever will be. So let these waters call us to be blessings, and at the edges to know yet what to call us. From strength to strength, we remember, we renew, we shine on, and we shimmer yet, beloved, on this blue boat.
Good morning. We're the Vigisingham family. This morning, we light our home chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, with these words. We light this chalice for the light of truth and reality, the warmth of love and compassion, and the fire of commitment and promise. We light the symbol of our faith as we gather together.
My maternal grandmother, that means my mother's mother, was a Jain. Jainism is an ancient religion that began in India. In this photograph, you see my grandparents and two little girls. The one on the stool is my mother, and on the floor is her older sister, my aunt. They were eventually joined with two more sisters, 4 in all. They must have gone to a studio to take this photograph. I can kind of tell by the fake background. It was taken in the 1930s before the British left India, and I think that is why my grandfather is wearing a suit rather than a traditional Indian outfit. My grandmother has on a sari, which is typical, and the girls are also dressed in Indian outfits. As I said earlier, my grandmother was a Jain. Jainism traces its roots back to 24 spiritual leaders called Tirthankaras. The main ideas of Jainism are ahimsa, which is non-violence, satya, truth-telling, asteya, not stealing, brahmacharya, practicing control over one's body, and aparigraha, not craving material possessions. Most Jains tend to be vegetarians. You might be wondering, what does all this have to do with Unitarian Universalism? Well, two things. First, it's important to know about and learn of the religions of the world. It's one of our sources from which our 8 principles come. The source says, wisdom from the world's religions which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual lives. Second, when we discover the parallels between what we practice and what is our history and other religions, we feel closer to those people who practice other religions and understand that we are all connected, and this too is one of our principles. Tonight at sundown begins Yom Kippur, a very important day for people of the Jewish faith. We have Unitarian Universalist members who were raised Jewish and who continue to uphold the practices of Judaism. Our roots go back to Judaism. On this day, people of the Jewish faith ask for forgiveness from God for all their wrongdoings. In Jainism, there is no God, but there is a similar period of asking for forgiveness, and it usually falls along the same time as Yom Kippur, although this year it was earlier. What makes it so similar to the Jewish practice is that in both religions, Jainism and Judaism, you ask for forgiveness and no response is expected. For Jewish people, you ask for forgiveness and know that your name will be written in the book of life. For Jains, you say Michami Dukkadam. It means that if I have ever wronged you in word or thought or deed, either intentionally or by accident, may my actions, my thoughts, and my deeds not come to light. May they not be proven correct. And so I seek forgiveness. Michami Dukkadam. But the other person is not expected to say, yes, I forgive you. Instead, they say the same back to you. Michami Dukkadam. That's pretty amazing if you think about it. Usually when we say sorry, we expect the person to whom we are saying sorry to say something like, it's okay, I know you didn't mean it, or I accept your apology. However, in both these religions, you ask for forgiveness, whether you've done things by accident or intentionally, and trust that the other person will actually forgive you. So the next time you apologize for something, observe what it feels like to apologize and ask for forgiveness without expecting the other person to say anything back. And let's continue discovering the similarities between all the religions of the world.
Thank you, Dr. Tuli, for the story of your grandmother and her Jain practice of asking for forgiveness. I wonder if you are considering the wrongs you've experienced in your life, whether you've wronged someone or they've wronged you. I wonder if your heart is bruised by this experience and you are seeking the next steps forward. What does this story mean to you? How does it invite you to live? As we do each week, we invite you to light a candle. Maybe you light a candle for your own bruised heart. Maybe a candle to give you the strength to say, I'm sorry. Maybe it's a candle of healing, or even a candle of joy that repair has happened. Today, we light a candle for the 200,000 people who have died of COVID-19 in the United States, as we keep the communities that love them in our hearts. And we light our candle of witness for Daniel Prude. Daniel grew up in public housing in Chicago, one of 5 siblings. He experienced much tragedy in his life. In elementary school, his 11-year-old brother was hit and killed by a car. Years later, another brother was shot and killed, and his mother died shortly after. In 2018, one of his teenage nephews committed suicide. Daniel struggled and began acting erratically. He moved to Rochester to be with his brother. On March 30th of this year, he was naked in the street in an encounter with police. The autopsy lists asphyxiation as cause of death, with acute PCP intoxication as a contributing factor. Daniel was 41 years old.
Abide with me, fast falls eventide. The darkness deepens, still with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the
swift to its close, ebbs out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changes not, abide with me. I fear no foe, with thee at hand to bless. Ills have no weight, and tears no bitterness. Where is death's sting? Where grave thy victory? I triumph still if thou abide with me.
Spirit of life,
Still small voice within each and all.
we come together with songs of praise. We come together for a moment of stillness and silence. We come together in mournful lamentation.
Each from a different point on the map.
Each from an often fleeting season of life.
Each for our emerging identities.
Each from our ever-evolving beliefs.
We come together to give voice to our struggles, our sorrows, our outrage.
The loss of yet another person we love.
The fear we experience with each new storm.
Holding broken promises and bruised feelings.
We lift up our voices so that with each breath, our bodies may know true healing.
We come together to call forth the power of creation, alive within each of us and all around us.
Witnessed in the spark of a match.
In every droplet of cleansing water.
In the joining of hands and hearts.
We call forth our creative potential so that when we close our eyes, our minds may conceive of new possibilities for our shared future.
And yes, we come together to rejoice with thanksgiving for those flashes of compassion, repair, and hope.
When we find the courage to face our fears.
When we glean wisdom from our hard-won experiences.
When we uncover hidden strengths in our vulnerabilities.
We center joy so that with open hearts, we may become rooted in our strength, our courage, our wisdom.
Let our lone voices this day join together in this song of prayer so that we may witness our seemingly solitary struggles, our singular creations, and our particular joys as one of the many singers in the great chorus of life.
Let the congregation say,
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
My name is Lorraine Franz. I'm a member of the Beacon Unitarian Universalist congregation. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Beacon's Get Out the Boat activities. First, you should understand that for Unitarian Universalists, voting is not just a political issue. It's a matter of religious conviction. The fifth principle of Unitarian Universalism states, we affirm the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. This is why it is so disturbing for us to see people trying to suppress the vote and sabotage the way people vote. This is why the Unitarian Universalist Association this year has launched a program called UU the Vote, a nationwide nonpartisan initiative partnering with other nonpartisan Get Out the Vote groups. The Beacon team is part of that initiative. For the past few months, our Get Out the Vote team has been writing postcards and sending text messages to voters, urging them to vote, asking them to pledge to vote, giving them information about how to vote in their localities, especially if they're living somewhere where the authorities are actively trying to suppress citizen participation in voting. So far, we've written 3,000 postcards, and after all said and done, we will probably write thousands more. I think about each of those postcards going to an individual person, encouraging them, helping them figure out how to get to the polls and make their voter voices heard in this country. In the last few weeks before the election, phone banking is going to kick into high gear, where we will be talking to voters in real time and answering their questions directly. All of this speaks to Beacon's mission to feed the spirit and help the world. In a moment, you are going to be invited to contribute to the good works of Beacon, from getting out the vote to supporting the local community to nurturing congregational members. Please give generously.
It's the summer of COVID. I am sitting at our dining room table turned my office desk on a call with a Beacon leader. It's a little after 9 a.m. We're having a perfectly delightful conversation when out of nowhere I shout, "Knock it off!" My daughters, a teen and a tween, are eating breakfast in silence at our kitchen table just 2 feet away. Then a sibling skirmish breaks out over a teaspoon of milk. The younger one shouts, "You always leave me the dregs of the milk." The older one shouts back even louder, "I can't help it that it's the end of the milk. Why are you such a baby about it? Finish it and start a new one." At which point, I attempt the role of peacekeeper by joining in the shouting. In all relationships, there are moments of conflict. This is both natural and healthy. What matters are the stories that we create to understand those moments. It's the so what factor. So what does this mean? What does the teaspoon of milk represent to my 2 daughters? If she truly respected me, she wouldn't leave me the dregs of the milk. She just treats me like a baby. Why is she always blaming me for everything? Why do I always have to be the big kid? attending to these stories, not just the single stories, as novelist Chimamanda Adichie calls them, but the multiple stories being formed underneath that moment of conflict. That's where the real work lies. So I ask myself as their parent, do my daughters have the capacity to hear the story that they are creating? Can they hear themselves? Do they have the capacity to hear the other's story? Do they have the capacity to forgive, and through forgiveness to reshape the meaning of that story? Or will they just become entrenched, shouting one another down until only one voice wins? It was your average sibling skirmish. Nevertheless, I am mindful that that skirmish has the potential to plant seeds of anger and resentment, mistrust that could last decades. Those of you with siblings know what I'm talking about. This month, I talked to a 91-year-old man who had quite a few words to say about his younger sibling. Keeping the peace between my daughters is one of the small ways I am nurturing the practice of forgiveness and repair against a backdrop of divisions within our country. Storylines planted hundreds of years ago, which are being replayed down through the centuries by actors committing injustice after injustice. We are just the next set of actors. On Thursday afternoon, a family member requested prayers for Louisville, Kentucky. My father's entire family lives in Kentucky, in Louisville. My grandmother, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. The Attorney General on Thursday was releasing the grand jury's decision against the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. And I could guess what was going to happen next. Andrea Ritchie, the author of Invisible No More, Police Violence Against Black Women and Women of Color, said, "The system that killed Breonna Taylor is not set up to provide justice or reparations for the killing of Breonna Taylor. It's too entrenched in its own storyline." So yes, I lifted up prayers for Breonna Taylor, for her family, for all of the Black Americans across the country who have lost their Breonna, for all of the protesters who have shown up day after day for 100 days in Louisville in the midst of a pandemic, for all those who hoped that the story of Thursday's grand jury decision would finally disrupt America's well-worn story of injustice. And I know how the pain of that decision is like pouring acid on a wound. My beloveds, for all of us, a balm for your soul this day. Prayers alone will not offer the healing this week. True healing requires a reckoning of our stories. It requires liberating ourselves from our internal prisons. It's difficult to reckon with our story when our sibling refuses to hear or to acknowledge the pain that is inflicted, let alone begin again in love. And I question whether white America really wants healing, whether they are ready for it. And I say they, realizing that I am white America, that much of the white America I know are people that I love. They just want the conflict to go away and to return to the fantasy stories of America as the good guy, the savior, the country of freedom, hope, and prosperity. When do we get back to that? I get it. I get that desire. To seek true healing requires being honest. It requires a reckoning with our stories. It requires unraveling all of the stories that we have told ourselves about who we are, about what we have achieved, and about what we are willing to do for love. It's far more comfortable to deceive ourselves through the stories that we tell, to surround ourselves with people who tell the same stories that we do, to get comfortable and to live out of that place of self-righteousness. This summer, the pages of Serene Jones's book, Call It Grace, Finding Meaning in a Fractured World, the pages of that book have become well worn in my hands as I read and reread how hatred rooted itself in the story of Serene Jones. Now, Dr. Jones is a theologian. She is the daughter of a theologian raised in the prairie theology of universalism. First at Yale Divinity School and then at Union Theological School in New York City as their first female president. Dr. Jones was and remains to this day an expert in the religious concepts on sin and forgiveness and grace. But what happens to your belief and your thinking in grace when you reckon with the story of your mother as a harsh, critical, and often uncaring person? What happens to your notions of forgiveness when your grandfather is abusive and racist? What happens to your identity when you grow up and unearth histories of lynching and terrorism against people of color in your hometown, in your home state? What happens to the sacred promises to God that you've made when you can't keep the sacred promises you made to your partner? What happens when a young man who looks so much like your first love, so much like so many of the boys that you grew up with, poor and desperate for hope, when that young man bombs a federal building, injuring your family and taking the lives of people you care about? What happens to our notions, our values, our very sacred beliefs? This is Serene Jones's reckoning. 5 years after Timothy McVeigh bombed the Murrah building, she writes, and my hatred and my rage have not yet subsided. They had lodged into my soul, rearing up when I was frustrated, tired, or weak. At times, I thought the light had reasserted itself to battle all my darkness inside. But my anger at McVeigh, my grandpa, my mother, my disappearing husband had become an enduring test to my theology. How do you reconcile a theology grounded in love and grace and forgiveness when your inner world is so rooted in your pain and your hatred? One evening, Serene Jones is sitting with her 6-year-old daughter, Charis. Charis is learning how to count money, and in the blink of an eye, panic overwhelms her 6-year-old self. I can't do it, she cries. I'm so stupid. She kicks and pushes and runs away. And Serene Jones goes after her daughter and holds her as she cries. And then Charis cries out, I want my new shoes, Mommy. Earlier that day, her new blue shoes had gone missing in the new back and forth movements, living between divorced parents. She thought her dad had lost them. And so she cries out, how could Daddy lose them? How could he? And that last question, how could he, pushes the pain in Serene Jones's body. And anger flares up inside her. How could he? How could they? She realizes how much hatred and anger, how much it had consumed her, how comforting they were to her, how secure they made her feel. She said, it was then that I realized why forgiveness is so hard. It wasn't because forgiveness lets people off the hook, which is what I had so often tricked myself into thinking, because we can forgive and still hold people accountable. What makes forgiveness hard is that it demands we give up the snuggly, warm blanket of hate we believe will protect us from future harm. But the truth is that hatred, the hatred that we believe shields us, is the hatred that kills us. In that moment, Jones makes an intentional decision a kind of an unbelievable, unimagined decision. She chooses not to live out of dirty pain, a phrase created by therapist Resmaa Menakem. Dirty pain happens when we live from our most wounded places, becoming cruel or violent, or physically or emotionally running away. They also create more pain for themselves and for others. That's what dirty pain is. So unlike the dirty pain that is passed down to Serene Jones from her grandfather and her mother, she chooses a different path in that moment with her daughter, Charis. She chooses clean pain, one that mends and builds our capacity for growth. When it comes to healing wounds from centuries-old conflict, Resmaa Menakem reminds us that there is no comfortable path. There is pain, dirty or clean, life-taking or life-giving. We have to decide, are we for harm or are we for life? Serene Jones writes, I couldn't lie to my daughter and make it all right. I couldn't forgive. The pain still cut too deep. But I could decide not to harm her with my rage, not to let my fury distort her vision of life and love. This is the inner work of forgiveness, illustrated by the mystical theologian Howard Thurman. Jones learns to forgive with Thurman as her guide. An African American living in the midst of Jim Crow America, Jones writes this about Thurman. He never suggested that Black people en masse should simply forgive and forget with a shrug of their shoulders the ravages of harm perpetrated against them. That was nonsense. What he pointed to instead was the danger of holding on to internalized rage that makes you captive to the very things you seek to resist. For freedom to find us as human beings, we must step out of our own internal prisons and we must imagine a different future. Beloved, can we imagine a different future? Can we free ourselves from our own stories, our own internal prisons of rage and hatred? Can we find liberation? I know some of you are hesitating to those questions. Some, maybe a voice inside even defiantly shouts, no. A colleague of mine, one I deeply respect, shared with me recently that whenever they preach on forgiveness, people inevitably come forward and say, I can't forgive. And then they share their own painful story of a person or a people or a system who was cruel or violent or deceiving. My colleague compassionately smiles and says, why start forgiveness there? Why start the practice of forgiveness with the hardest people to forgive? Why start with Timothy McVeigh, Serene Jones, or your grandfather, or your mother? Why start there? Instead, start small. Start small even against the backdrop, the larger backdrop happening in our country right now of anger and bitterness and self-righteousness. Start small so that you don't give up the hope that life inside and liberation are possible. We can't heal it all. We are actors in a larger story. And forgiveness will keep on happening generation after generation. But we have to do our own work with our own clean pain so that what we pass on are gifts of forgiveness in the practice of forgiveness. So I am starting small this day by keeping the peace over a teaspoon of milk. Let it be so. Amen.
Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. And your people are my people. Your people are mine. Your people are my people. You're divine, my divine. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. Where you go, I will go, beloved. Where you go, I will go. And your people are my people. Your people are mine. Your people are my people. You're divine, my divine. You're divine, my divine. You're divine, my divine.
How good and how pleasant it has been for us to be together. After this week filled with heartbreaks and disappointments out of news from DC and Louisville, it has been a balm to worship together this morning. Together, bringing ourselves with our gifts and our wisdom enriches our community. When we come together, we share the stories of our ancestors, as Dr. Tuli did, telling us about her maternal grandmother and her practices as a Jain. Learning the lessons of our ancestors and wisdom from the world's religions helps us feel close to one another. When we come together, we share the stories of our own hard-won experiences, as Celine Jones did. Lessons about the hurt and hatred, repair and liberation. When we come together, beloved, we embrace the truth that your people are my people, and my people are yours. This is how we are called to live. I hope you found some inspiration, a spark of possibility to carry you through the coming week. And if you're not ready to head back into the real world just yet, join us for our virtual social hour, where we'll continue this conversation together. Information about how to connect will be in the chat box on the screen after this. May we boldly continue the work of justice, equity, and peace for all. So with this vision in our hearts and minds, go forth and be a blessing to one another. So may it be. Blessed be, Ashe, and Amen.